The sound of shattering crystal was a gunshot in the symphony of a sun-drenched Atlanta afternoon. It sliced through the polite honey-laced laughter of the 5 women seated around the grand mahogany dining table. Their collective gasp, a rustle of silk and Chanel. On the floor, a kaleidoscope of glittering shards lay scattered across the pristine white marble of the Blackwood mansion, remnants of a water goblet that had, a moment before, been the victim of an errant diamond-ringed hand. From her position, by the serving hatch, Kesha Williams watched, a body still but her mind sharp, cataloguing the scene with an unnerving calm. She had been working in the imposing Gothic Revival mansion for only 3 months, a ghost in the machine of millionaire widower David Blackwood's life. But in those 90 days, she had learned to read the silent, vicious language of the ultra-wealthy. She saw the flash of annoyance in Victoria Ashworth's eyes, not at the accident, but at the interruption. She saw the cool calculation on Priscilla Montgomery's face, already assessing liability, and she saw the shared unspoken consensus that rippled between the 5 of them. This was a mess for someone else to handle. For her to handle. This woman shouldn't even be in the same room as us. Victoria Ashworth whispered, her voice a venomous hiss meant only for her She didn't look at Kesha, but the words were aimed with the precision of a sniper's bullet. Kesha moved without being told, her worn sneakers silent on the marble. She fetched the dustpan and brush from the kitchen, her movements fluid and economical. As she knelt, the shards glittered like fallen stars. The women at the table resumed their conversation, their voices a deliberate, exclusionary hum. They were contestants in a bizarre month-long competition for the hand of David Blackwood, and more importantly, for the role of mother to his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. They were a carefully curated collection of Atlanta's elite, a lawyer, a doctor, a businesswoman, a socialite, and an architect, all white, all rich, all seemingly perfect on paper, and all of them, Kesha knew, were rotten to the core. As she swept the last of the crystal into the pan, she felt a pair of small eyes on her. Peeking from behind the heavy oak door of the dining room was Emma Blackwood, a tiny, fragile figure, with her father's dark hair and her late mother's solemn eyes. The child had lost her mother in a brutal car accident the year before, a tragedy that had stolen her voice and her smile. In the 3 months Kesha had been there, she had seen the first glimmers of that smile return, tentative and precious. Now, Emma's face was clouded with confusion. What neither the women at the table nor the child in the doorway knew was that this entire tableau of a cruel whisper, every contemptuous glance, every shard of glittering glass was being observed. Upstairs in the silent wood-paneled study, David Blackwood watched it all on a bank of high-definition monitors. The idea for this marriage competition had come from his therapist, a desperate gambit to find a stable maternal figure for his daughter. Let Emma choose, the therapist had suggested. Let her live with them and see who she connects with. So David had selected the 5 women, believing their pedigrees and resumes were a guarantee of character. He had been disastrously wrong. Hiding just out of sight of the camera's view, Emma crept into the study and tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "why are those women being mean to Kesha?" The innocent question was a gut punch. It echoed in the vast emptiness of his heart, a space once filled by his wife, now occupied by a gnawing, ever-present grief. He looked from the screen, where the 5 women laughed as if nothing had happened, to his daughter's troubled face. He had brought these vipers into his home, believing he was protecting his child, only to expose her to a new, more insidious kind of poison. From day one, a silent war had been declared on Kesha. It wasn't because she was a threat to their marital ambitions. In their eyes, she was less than nothing, a piece of the furniture that happened to be black. The war began for a much simpler, more infuriating reason. Emma adored her. The 7-year-old who shrank from the candidate's grasping, performative affection blossomed under Kesha's quiet, steady care. She followed Kesha around the vast mansion like a shadow, her small hand often finding its way into the cleaners. They shared secrets in whispered tones. They baked cookies shaped like butterflies, and they played hopscotch on the sun-drenched patio. It was Kesha who had finally coaxed a full, genuine laugh from the child, a sound David hadn't heard in over a year. And the 5 women hated her for it. They saw Emma's affection for Kesha not as a sign of the child's healing, but as a threat to the social order. "That girl needs to learn about social hierarchy early on," declared Priscilla Montgomery, the razor-sharp corporate lawyer, during a dinner party they thought was private. David, listening through the newly installed microphones, felt a cold fury settle in his stomach. It's important that she understands who the appropriate people are for her social class. The microphones had been his reluctant concession to a terrible truth. After the first week, Emma, who had been sleeping through the night for the first time in months, began having nightmares again. She started flinching at loud noises, her anxiety returning like a malevolent tide. David knew something was wrong, and he needed to know what it was. What he heard was a litany of casual cruelty, a constant stream of poisonous remarks about people who don't know their place and the inappropriate influences for a child of good breeding. Kesha, who held a degree in education from Clark Atlanta University but was working as a cleaner to pay for her mother's cancer treatments, was the unwitting target. She heard the barbs, the thinly veiled insults disguised as maternal concern. She felt their eyes on her back as she played with Emma, their judgment as thick and suffocating as the summer humidity. But when she bowed her head in the face of their insults, it was not an act of submission, it was strategy. She had learned it at her mother's knee. Her mother had been a housekeeper for one of Charleston's wealthiest families for 30 years. A life of impeccable service and quiet dignity. Kesha grew up in the shadow of that world, learning its codes, its euphemisms, its subtle cruelties. She learned that for people like the Ashworths and the Montgomerys of the world, kindness from the help was acceptable, but love was a transgression. At 14, she had watched her own mother be fired, dismissed after 2 decades of loyal service because her employer's son had grown too fond of her. The excuse had been a vague, insidious accusation of not knowing her place, the same poisonous phrase that now echoed in the marble halls of the Blackwood mansion. But these women, in their arrogance, missed the fire in Kesha's eyes. They didn't see the quiet determination forged in the crucible of a lifetime of prejudice. They didn't know that her degree wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a weapon. Her time teaching in underfunded public schools had honed her ability to read people with surgical precision. She knew when she was being underestimated, and more importantly, she knew how to turn that underestimation into her greatest advantage. The game had just begun, and Kesha Williams knew something her enemies could not possibly conceive. The best revenge comes to those who know how to wait, and the most spectacular downfall belongs to those who are too arrogant to ever see it coming. The next morning, the conspiracy convened in the mansion's private library, a room paneled in dark cherry wood and lined with leather-bound books that none of the 5 women had any intention of reading. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, glittering spies. Through the window, they could see Kesha and Emma in the garden. Emma's laughter, clear and bright, drifted up to them, an infuriating soundtrack to their plotting. Victoria Ashworth, an heiress to an oil fortune with a face as hard and polished as the diamonds in her ears, paced the expensive Persian rug. "We need to be strategic," she said, her voice low and tense. "That woman is influencing the child in a way that is profoundly inappropriate for our world. It's unseemly." Priscilla Montgomery, the lawyer, sat poised in a wing chair, her Italian leather briefcase open on her lap. "I've already looked into the legalities," she announced, her tone clipped and professional. "David can terminate any employee for cultural incompatibility. It's a clean, no-fault dismissal, no risk of a wrongful termination suit." "Cultural incompatibility," scoffed Christina Hawthorne, a dermatologist whose clientele consisted exclusively of Atlanta's elite, and whose belief in a social caste system was as deeply ingrained as her knowledge of collegian. "That's a delicate way of putting it. The problem is far more obvious." She gestured with a dismissive flick of her wrist toward the garden. "Look at them. It's a question of breeding." Rebecca Sterling, an architect who designed sprawling mansions for governors and tech billionaires, nodded in firm agreement. She saw the world in terms of structure and design, and to her, this burgeoning relationship was a flaw in the social blueprint. "Emma needs to learn about appropriate associations. This familiarity with the staff is creating unrealistic expectations. It's unhealthy." Amanda Chase, whose family owned a chain of ultra-luxury hotels and who viewed human relationships through a lens of transactional value, was, as always, more direct. "Let's stop dancing around it," she said, her voice sharp. "The problem is that a black cleaning lady is occupying the emotional real estate that belongs to one of us. Emma should be clinging to our skirts, not chasing after her in the garden." Their consensus was absolute, their goal clear. Kesha had to go. They were a pack of perfectly coiffed wolves, circling their prey, convinced of their own intellectual and social superiority. They saw a simple cleaning lady, uneducated and unimportant. They were blind to the truth. They couldn't see the girl standing in a Charleston mansion, watching her mother's heartbreak. They couldn't see the determined university student at Clark Atlanta, devouring books on sociology, psychology, and institutional racism. not just for a grade, but for survival. They couldn't see the passionate young teacher in a crumbling inner-city school. Fighting for children the system had already discarded, learning to navigate treacherous administrative politics with a skill that would have impressed a seasoned diplomat. They saw a maid. They had no idea they were facing a warrior. Later that afternoon, the first coordinated salvo was fired. Emma came running through the grand hall, her face bright with excitement, heading for the kitchen where the scent of freshly baked cookies was beginning to waft. "Kesha," she called out, "did you make the butterfly ones?" Before she could reach the door, Victoria intercepted her, her movements a study in predatory grace. She knelt, bringing her face level with Emma's, her smile a carefully constructed mask of warmth. "Emma, darling," she cooed, "how about we play something a little more sophisticated? I brought a lovely chess set back from France. It was made for a prince." Emma looked confused. "I don't know how to play chess." "Exactly," Priscilla chimed in, stepping forward to gently block the path to the kitchen. Her smile was less successful than Victoria's. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Intellectual games are vital for the development of a superior mind. It's never too early to start. Emma's face, which had been so open and happy, began to close. "Kesha taught me checkers yesterday," she said, her voice small. "She said any game that makes you think is a good game." A look passed between the women, a silent, shared flicker of contempt. "Honey," Christina said, her voice syrupy sweet. "There are different kinds of games. Some are more appropriate for certain people. Checkers is a simple game. Chess is a game of strategy, of power." It was at that precise moment that Kesha appeared at the kitchen door, a tray of still warm butterfly-shaped cookies in her hands. She had heard every word. Her expression, however, remained placid, her eyes holding a serene, almost maternal light. The contrast between her genuine warmth and the candidate's manufactured charm was stark. "Pardon the interruption," she said, her voice a model of polite deference. The politeness was a shield and a weapon. "Emma, your chocolate chip cookies are ready." Emma's face lit up as if a switch had been flipped. She darted past the women and threw her arms around Kesha's legs. "You promised." "The butterfly ones are my favorite." "I know, sweetie," Kesha said, stroking the girl's hair. "And I saved some extra dough for us to make more tomorrow." Victoria watched the exchange, her jaw tight with a barely concealed fury. The effortless affection between the two of them was a physical affront, a constant, galling reminder of her own failure to connect with the child. It made their mission all the more urgent. She decided to address Kesha directly. At first, she used her name as if it were a foreign object she was reluctant to touch with her tongue. "Kesha," she said, the name dripping with condescension. "Don't you think you're overstepping? Your duties are to clean the house. We are here to see to Emma's developmental needs." Kesha looked up from the child, her eyes meeting Victoria's. She smiled, a polite, perfect curve of her lips that held no warmth whatsoever. In the dark depths of her eyes, something dangerous flashed for an instant before being extinguished. "Of course, Miss Ashworth, I was simply following Mr. Blackwood's instructions. He was very clear that my primary responsibility was to ensure Emma is fed and happy." The reply was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It was unassailable, polite, and it subtly reminded them that she was acting on the orders of the very man they were trying to impress. Amanda Chase stepped forward, unable to resist joining the fray. "Feeding a child is one thing," she said, her tone implying Kesha was too simple to understand the difference. "Forming emotional attachments is another. It's important to maintain a professional distance." "I understand perfectly, Miss Chase," Kesha replied, her voice maintaining the same maddeningly sweet cadence. "I was always taught that the essence of professional childcare is giving a child precisely what they need, exactly when they need it. Right now, it seems she needs a cookie and a friend." With that, she gently guided Emma into the kitchen, leaving the 5 women standing in the hall, unsettled and vaguely unnerved. There was an intelligence in Kesha's calm defiance, a sharp, strategic mind working behind the placid mask of the humble servant. They had assumed she was a pawn in their game. They were beginning to get the uncomfortable feeling that she might be a player. That night, David Blackwood sat in the darkness of his study, the glow of the monitors painting his face in stark shades of blue and gray. He watched the recording of the cookie incident for the 3rd time. He saw the calculated cruelty, the thinly veiled racism, the attempt to poison his daughter's mind with their twisted ideas of class and status. But he also saw Kesha's response, the dignity, the intelligence, the unshakable calm. He saw How she protected Emma not with anger but with a quiet strength that was more powerful than any outburst. He was beginning to realize that the competition was revealing far more than he had bargained for. It wasn't just showing him who would be a good mother for Emma, it was showing him the rot that festered beneath the gleaming surface of his own social stratum. He saw the small acts of sabotage, a misplaced drawing of Emma's, a spilled juice box on a book Kesha was reading to her, all designed to make Kesha look incompetent or careless. He saw 5 adult women, titans of their respective fields, reduced to petty, vindictive high school bullies. The real test came at dinner. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The 5 women directed their conversation exclusively at David, peppering him with questions about his business, his travels, his opinions on art and politics, while pointedly ignoring both Emma and Kesha, who was serving the meal. Then, out of the blue, Emma spoke, her small voice cutting through the charade like a knife. "Daddy," she asked, looking at him with wide, honest eyes, "why don't the ladies like Kesha?" The question detonated in the center of the table like a silent bomb. Forks froze halfway to mouths. 5 pairs of eyes widened in panic. Victoria was the first to recover, forcing a laugh that sounded like cracking ice. "Whatever do you mean, sweetie?" she purred, her smile a grotesque parody of maternal affection. "We adore all of the staff. They work so hard." "No, you don't," Emma replied, with the brutal, unwavering honesty that only a child possesses. "I heard you. In the library. You said Kesha didn't know her place. You said you had to make her go away." A collective intake of breath. The blood drained from David's face. He turned to his daughter. "Emma, where did you hear that?" "This morning. They were whispering. They said she was a bad influence and that you would fire her if they made a report." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a dense, heavy thing, filled with the weight of their exposed deceit. 5 of the most articulate, powerful women in Atlanta were rendered utterly speechless. Their conspiracy laid bare by a 7-year-old girl, Priscilla the lawyer, scrambled to regain control. "Emma, you must have misunderstood," she said, her voice strained. Sometimes adult conversations can sound different to a child's ears, but it was too late. David wasn't looking at Priscilla. He was looking at the faces around the table, the guilt, the panic, the fury at being caught, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his daughter had understood perfectly. He was also beginning to realize something else. He, too, had underestimated Kesha Williams. He had seen her as a kind caregiver, a fortunate addition to his staff. He had not seen the warrior hiding in plain sight. Each humiliation, each insult she had absorbed, had not weakened her. It had tempered her, sharpening a resolve that had been forged in the fires of a lifetime of such injustices. It was a silent, unyielding strength, and it was growing with the certainty of someone who knows, with absolute conviction, that the most satisfying victory is the one where your enemies, blinded by their own arrogance, orchestrate their own spectacular destruction. The war for the Blackwood Mansion was far from over, but the tide had just begun to turn. The call was made at 4:57 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. In the small Spartan room she occupied in the mansion's service wing, Kesha Williams sat on the edge of her bed, the phone pressed to her ear. The sky outside her window was a dark, bruised purple, the main house a hulking silhouette against the pre-dawn light. "Diane, I need you to do something for me," Kesha whispered, her voice tight with a tension that was entirely foreign to her older sister. In her stylish DC apartment, Diane Williams Johnson sat bolt upright in bed. A Peabody Award-winning investigative journalist for CNN, Diane was used to frantic, middle-of-the-night calls, but never from Kesha. Her sister was the calm one, the anchor. "Key, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is Mum okay?" "I'm fine. Mum's fine," Kesha said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I'm in a fight, a real one. I'm being targeted by 5 wealthy, powerful women who want me gone, and I need ammunition." For the next 20 minutes, with the meticulous detail of a key witness, Kesha laid it all out. Every coded insult, every racist comment disguised as social concern, every act of sabotage culminating in the conversation Emma had overheard in the library. Diane listened, her journalistic instincts firing on all cylinders. This wasn't just a personal dispute. It was a textbook case of systemic discrimination, the kind of story she had built her career on exposing. "These women have resources, Kesha, connections, going to war with them, are you sure?" Kesha's voice, when she replied, was as hard, as still. "Diane, Mama, worked for 30 years, bowing her head and biting her tongue while people like this humiliated her for sport. She did it so we could have a different life. I will not repeat her story. Not now, not when I have Emma to protect. The mention of the child, spoken with such fierce, maternal protectiveness, settled it. Diane knew her sister. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting an innocent child who had latched onto Kesha as a lifeline. All right, Diane said, already reaching for the laptop on her nightstand. Give me their full names. Give me 4 hours, I'll find everything. I'll find the skeletons in their Chanel closets. As Diane began her digital excavation in Washington, D.C., David Blackwood initiated his own, more traditional one in Atlanta. The conversation Emma had recounted at the dinner table had been a tipping point. The veil had been torn away, and he could no longer pretend this was merely a case of clashing personalities. This was a calculated, malicious campaign. He made a call to a man named Marcus Thompson, a discreet private investigator who specialized in peeling back the polished veneer of the social elite. Thompson was a former FBI agent with a reputation for being relentless and invisible. Marcus, David said, his voice grim, I'm hiring you to do a full background check on 5 women. I want everything. Financials, legal histories, personal entanglements. Dig deep. I have a feeling the ground is soft. While the 2 investigations began to churn in the background, life at the mansion became a masterclass in psychological warfare. The 5 women, stung by their exposure at the dinner table, escalated their campaign. They knew they were on borrowed time. They had to force David's hand before Emma's influence grew any stronger. Their new plan, masterminded by Victoria and refined by Priscilla, was to create a comprehensive dossier, a behavioral report documenting Kesha's transgressions. In Priscilla's opulent guest suite, she sat at her laptop crafting the document with the cold precision of a seasoned litigator. Allegations of violation of family privacy, she read aloud, a smug smile playing on her lips. Inappropriate influence over a minor. Attempts to emotionally manipulate her employer through the child. It's all lies, of course, but it's beautifully substantiated. Christina, the dermatologist, added with admiration, the legal jargon makes it sound so official. I can add a section from a medical perspective, concerns about the psychological impact of an unstable caregiver on a traumatized child. Rebecca and Amanda exchanged a look of deep satisfaction. This was their world, the world of narratives, of spin, of carefully constructed realities where truth was irrelevant and perception was everything. They were engineering the perfect, professional assassination of a cleaning lady's character. It was systematic, irrefutable, and, they believed, utterly foolproof against a woman they assumed had neither the resources nor the intellect to fight back. They were wrong. Kesha had anticipated this exact strategy. She had seen it used by school principals to oust talented black teachers who didn't fit the culture. She knew that, when Prejudice couldn't win on merit, it resorted to paperwork. That afternoon, while dusting David's study, a room she now knew was under surveillance, she saw the document open on the printer tray where Priscilla had carelessly left it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She quickly, methodically, read every lie, every malicious distortion of her relationship with Emma. She saw her genuine affection twisted into something sinister, her care painted as manipulation. That there was no panic, no despair. Instead, a cold, crystalline calm settled over her. It was the same serenity she'd felt at 14, watching her mother pack her belongings in a cardboard box. This was not a new pain, just an old one in a new, more expensive house. She knew what she had to do. That night, after tucking Emma into bed and reading her a story until the child's breathing was deep and even, Kesha made another call. This time it was to Dr. Angela Morrison, her former professor and mentor at Clark Atlanta University, one of the nation's leading authorities on child development and attachment theory. Professor Morrison, Kesha began, I need your professional expertise. I need you to document the emotional well-being of a child in a highly delicate domestic situation. Dr. Morrison, a formidable woman who had guided Kesha through her thesis on reparative bonds in orphaned children, immediately understood the subtext. Kesha, are you asking me to conduct an independent psychological evaluation? Yes, Professor, and I need it to be unimpeachable. The kind of report that would stand up in any court, against any challenge. For the next 40 minutes, Kesha didn't just outline a defense. She outlined an offensive, a multi-pronged strategy that would leverage the very academic and professional expertise her attackers assumed she lacked. The game board was being reset, and Kesha was about to make her move. The next day, the candidates launched what they believed would be their checkmate. It was an act of breathtaking cruelty. They took Emma's most prized possession, a worn one-eyed teddy bear named Barnaby, a final gift from her mother. They hid it, let Emma spiral into a state of frantic, tearful panic for hours, and then discovered it tucked away in the back of Kesha's small closet in the service wing. They staged the reveal for maximum dramatic effect, gathering in the hall outside Kesha's room. "Emma, honey, we found him. We found Barnaby," Victoria announced, pulling the bear from the closet with a theatrical flourish. Emma, her face blotchy and stained with tears, looked from the bear to Kesha, her small face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Kesha, why did you take Barnaby?" "Oh, honey, I didn't take him," Kesha said, her voice gentle, though David, watching on his monitor, could see the profound pain in her eyes. It was one thing for them to attack her, but to use Emma's trauma against her was monstrous. "A mistake," Priscilla said, her voice dripping with faint disbelief. "Emma, did you leave your teddy bear in the staff quarters?" "No," Emma whispered, fresh tears welling. "He always sleeps on my pillow." Christina knelt, putting her arm around the distraught child. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice a venomous whisper, "sometimes people, different people, take things that aren't theirs, not because they're bad, but because they are envious. They want to have the nice things that we have." It was then that David witnessed something truly extraordinary. He expected Kesha to protest, to defend herself, to cry. She did none of those things. She walked forward, knelt in front of Emma, and gently took the child's hands in her own. She ignored the 5 smirking women completely. She looked directly into Emma's eyes. "My sweet girl," she whispered, her voice full of an unshakable love. "You know in your heart that I would never, ever take anything that belongs to you. And you need to remember this. People who truly love you will never, ever try to confuse your heart." The simple, profound wisdom of her words, the absolute dignity with which she spoke them, was a stark and brutal contrast to the candidate's calculated cruelty. In that moment, David Blackwood didn't just see an employee being framed, he saw a mother protecting her child. He realized he was witnessing a battle not for his hand in marriage, but for his daughter's soul. That evening, as the 5 women gathered in the drawing room toasting their definitive victory with glasses of his best champagne, 2 phone calls took place that sealed their fate. The first was to Kesha. From Diane. Sister Diane's voice crackled with triumphant energy. "You are not going to believe what I found. It's all public record, darling. Financial irregularities, hushed-up lawsuits, ethics violations. They aren't just prejudiced, they're a pack of systemic predators. They're far more vulnerable than they could ever imagine." The second call was made by David Blackwood. He had seen enough, he had gathered his evidence. His rage had cooled into a hard, diamond-sharp resolve. It was time to stop observing and start acting. He called Marcus Thompson. "I have everything I need," David said. Then he called Dr. Morrison, and then he called Diane Williams Johnson. The final act was set. He was about to bring the curtain down on the whole sordid affair, but first, he needed to speak with the woman at the center of the storm, the woman he had so profoundly underestimated, and who was about to discover that in this war, she was not fighting alone. The following Friday afternoon, David called a final meeting in the formal library. The 5 candidates arrived, dressed to the nines, their faces alight with greedy anticipation. They saw the expensive champagne on ice and assumed it was for a celebration. They saw the large projection screen and assumed it was for a sentimental slideshow. They were confident, triumphant, utterly oblivious to the ambush that awaited them. When they entered, they were surprised to see they were not alone. 3 other people were seated in the wingback chairs opposite the sofa where David directed them to sit. There was a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman who radiated an intimidating intelligence, a tough-looking man with the watchful eyes of a hawk, and an older, distinguished woman with a kind but serious face. "Ladies," David began, his voice devoid of all warmth, "thank you for coming. Before I announce my decision regarding the future of this family, I thought it would be prudent to share some of the findings from my selection process." Victoria smiled, a confident predatory gleam in her eye. "Of course, David, we're all ears." David picked up a remote and clicked it. The screen behind him flickered to life. The first image was a scanned headline from a financial journal. "Ashworth Foundation VP Victoria Ashworth, accused of diverting charity funds." A picture of a younger Victoria at a gala was splashed across the page. Victoria's face went white, then a blotchy, furious red. "That's a lie. A baseless accusation that was settled years ago." "Was it?" the sharp-looking woman asked, standing up. "I'm Diane Williams Johnson, from CNN. My sources confirm that the matter was settled when your family paid back the $250,000 you embezzled." on the condition that the charity not press charges. I have a new report on the matter airing nationwide on Monday. We can watch a preview, if you like. Victoria sank back into the sofa as if she'd been shot. David clicked the remote again. The next slide showed a legal filing. Priscilla Montgomery and Montgomery and Associates named in class action. Lawsuit for racial discrimination and creating a hostile work environment. The names of 3 former black associates were clearly visible. That's taken out of context. Priscilla stammered, her composure shattering. Context. The hawk-eyed man interjected, his voice a low growl. I'm Marcus Thompson, private investigator. I've spoken to all 3 of those former employees. I've also found 2 other suits against you that were settled out of court with ironclad NDAs. The context seems pretty clear to me. Click, a report from a state medical board detailing the suspension of Dr. Christina Hawthorne's license in California for unethical practices. Click, an IRS investigation into Rebecca Sterling for tax evasion through offshore shell corporations. Click, another hostile work environment lawsuit. This one against Amanda Chase's hotel chain, with sworn testimony about her use of racial slurs. One by one, their perfect lives were dismantled in high definition. You aren't just prejudiced, David said, his voice a low, cold fury. Are predators, and I have documented every single vicious attack you have made on an innocent woman in my home. He played the audio. Their own voices filled the silent room, hissing their racist poison, outlining their plans, plotting to frame Kesha with the teddy bear. This is an invasion of privacy. Victoria shrieked, finding her voice. In my own home, David laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. The home where you conspired to psychologically torture my child and destroy an innocent person. I don't think so. It was then that the distinguished older woman, Dr. Morrison, stood up. I conducted an independent evaluation of Emma Blackwood this week at her father's request. She announced, her voice carrying the weight of academic authority. My professional conclusion is that the child has formed a healthy, restorative, attachment bond with her primary caregiver, Ms. Kesha Williams. This bond has been essential to her ongoing recovery from post-traumatic stress. Any attempt to sever that bond would be, in my expert opinion, profoundly and catastrophically damaging to the child's mental health. As if on cue, the library door opened and Kesha walked in, holding Emma by the hand. The little girl's eyes scanned the room, saw the 5 pale, horrified faces on the sofa, and then ran directly to David, burying her face in his leg. Then she looked back at Kesha, her eyes wide with a child's fear. Kesha, you're not leaving, are you? Kesha walked over and knelt, stroking Emma's hair. No, sweetheart, I'm not leaving. David looked past his daughter, his eyes locking with Kesha's. The whole world narrowed to the space between them. He then turned his gaze back to the 5 women, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and disbelief. You assumed Kesha Williams was just a cleaning lady because she's black, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. You never bothered to learn that she holds a degree in education from Clark Atlanta University, with 3 specializations in child development and a folder full of glowing references that would put any of you to shame. Victoria, desperate, played her final, pathetic card. David, think about what you're doing. This is a terrible mistake. Think of your social standing. Think of Emma's future, the circles she moves in. Oh, I am thinking of the future, David said, his voice suddenly soft. He held out his hand to Kesha, who took it, her fingers lacing with his. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. I'm thinking of a future filled with honesty, and kindness, and real love. Kesha, will you marry me? The silence in the room was so complete it was a physical force. Emma's head snapped up, her jaw dropping. The 5 candidates stared, their faces frozen in masks of utter shock. Kesha looked from David's earnest, hopeful face to Emma's wide, astonished eyes. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I will, yes, Emma screamed, launching herself from her father's leg and into Kesha's arms. Now you can be my real mum. Impossible, Christina whispered, aghast. You're marrying the maid. No, David corrected her, pulling Kesha and Emma into a family embrace. I'm marrying the most intelligent, compassionate, and brave woman I have ever known. The woman who saved my daughter while you 5 were trying to destroy her out of pure ugly bigotry. Diane's camera crew, which had been waiting discreetly in the hall, entered the room, cameras rolling. This story airs Monday, she said, her voice crisp and professional. The fall of Atlanta's elite, how 5 racist socialites were exposed. I imagine your phones are about to get very busy. As if on cue, a phone buzzed, then another, and another. The story was already leaking online. Their careers, their reputations, their carefully curated social standing, all of it was incinerating in real time, humiliated and exposed. They were escorted from the mansion, a gauntlet of reporters, flashing cameras awaiting them on the manicured lawn. In the quiet of the library, Kesha stood holding Emma, her head resting on David's shoulder. She had not sought revenge, but justice had found her all the same. A new family was being born from the ashes of old prejudices, built not on status or wealth, but on the unshakable foundation of respect, dignity, and a love that had proven itself stronger than hate. The game was over. Kesha had won, and in doing so she had rewritten all the rules. 2 years later, the ripples of that day in the library had permanently reshaped all of their lives. Diane's expose became a cultural phenomenon, a case study in journalism schools on the insidious nature of modern-day prejudice. For the 5 women, the consequences were as devastating as they were permanent. Victoria Ashworth, disinherited and ostracized, was last seen working as a sales clerk in a suburban department store. Priscilla Montgomery was disbarred. Rebecca Sterling filed for bankruptcy. Christina Hawthorne's clinic was shuttered, and she moved out of state in disgrace. Amanda Chase was forced to sell her hotel empire to settle a mountain of lawsuits. Their downfall was total and absolute. Meanwhile, the Blackwood Williams family prospered in a way that had nothing to do with money. With David's full support, Kesha completed her master's degree in special education and launched the Emma Blackwood Foundation, a non-profit offering arts and music scholarships to underprivileged children. The mansion, once a place of cold formality and quiet grief, was now filled with laughter and music. Emma, at 9, was a thriving, joyful child, fluent in 2 languages and a gifted pianist. And there was a new addition, 6-month-old David Jr., who slept peacefully in Kesha's arms. One Sunday morning, Kesha stood by the window, watching David play in the garden with their children, the very garden where she had once been humiliated. She felt a profound sense of peace. Her true victory wasn't in her enemy's destruction, but in the beautiful, vibrant life she had built. It was living proof that a person's worth is not defined by their station, but by the content of their character. "Love," David called from the garden, his face beaming. "Come out here. Emma wrote a song for you." Kesha smiled and walked toward the sound of her family's laughter, her heart full. She hadn't just won a war. She had turned her victory into a legacy of love, proving that the most powerful response to prejudice is to build a world so full of joy and success that it renders the hatred of small-minded people utterly irrelevant.